We're going to get started. I'm so glad to have you all here. And Alex and Sable, you're here all the time, and that's great. And Amy, I'm so glad you're here, scarfing lunch off camera. Thanks for joining us. I this one is a little bit selfish, this topic, because at Appy, Alex, this year I presented on the like a problem of autonomy in engineering ethics. And it's a part of a book project that I'm working on now, but it's got me thinking a lot about autonomy in this bigger, like more than biomedical ethics context. And I think there's lots of really interesting questions to ask there and a lot of history to explore. But it strikes me that autonomy and respect for autonomy plays this like oversized role in Western philosophy and Western thinking. And we can trace that back in time, philosophically, historically. But I think it also shapes contemporary practice. And so, given the current moment and some of the work I've been doing in digital ethics, I thought it'd be fun to talk about respect for autonomy in the context of AI ethics. So we could dive into the AI side. We could talk about the history side. We could tease apart stuff from the podcast. Any place particular you all want to start?
I'll just say that I did not realize the podcast was this long, so I got on to listen to it half hour ago,
Yeah,
and so I got only through the first speaker. So
that's
uh,
okay.
I'll assume my ignorance, and yeah.
I did the same thing, Alex. I went to watch it earlier today and I was like, well, I guess I'm going to speed read the transcript because there's no way I can listen to the whole thing.
Yeah, it was kind of the same for me. I honestly forgot the club even was happening today until this morning. I thought I might be able to read through it quick, but I was not able to. I actually did hear a brief program on the radio yesterday that actually related to AI and autonomy though. It
Did
was
you?
about well, that's kind of what they were talking about, the angle they were talking about in it. It was there's some people are developing like an AI technology for people who have lost their voice, like and they medically
Oh,
can't
yeah.
speak anymore, to like so to use like an AI voice to help them talk. And it was talking about how like this one woman who like she was gonna have to have surgery that was like gonna have to actually like remove like her tongue and voice box because she had cancer. So before that, she like recorded hours of herself like reading books to play for her grandchildren. And since they had all those recordings of her talking, they were able to like make an AI voice that sounds like her. And it was basically just talking about the people who were like doing the program were talking about like if it still like accurately represents them or if like the AI might like add something else that it's learned and like take away like some of their ability to like speak for themselves, and also if like someone else could like use it to like speak for this person in a way that maybe something they don't want to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's super interesting. The idea that you could give somebody back their like authentic voice that they
Yeah.
lost.
Mhm.
Yeah. S- Strikes me that that parallels the wheelchair example that which I think came up in that the first of the three panelists, um, which could be the for me like the eyeglass example or any sort of technology with its affordances. There's a sense in which
Mhm.
like technologies can increase our autonomy, and that's
Yeah.
normally how they're designed, and that's what wheelchairs are designed to do. But AI seems to be a little
Yeah.
bit different. At least that's what that one panelist was arguing.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, like having a way for someone to never, could never speak again, like be able to speak through an AI, I think that that is a use. There, I'm mo not a big fan of AI in most uses, but this is one use where I think it could actually be valuable as long as it's used correctly and has limitations on it. I'm not sure as much though what like those t limitations would have to actually be. But this is one of the few uses of AI that I've heard of that I was actually like, you know what, this actually sounds like this could really benefit some people.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're in
Mhm.
that moment where products are being developed and they're being sold to us like this can be so good for you, without so much of the like, but don't worry about the things that could happen down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also, I guess to some extent, I was thinking about this because I was at a talk yesterday, but the idea of people, for instance, who don't speak a language very well and can also use AI to really enhance their abilities to communicate more clearly their ideas, which probably allows them to communicate more complex things. Um, so that might be another context of this enhancement, I guess, of autonomy, if that's what we can call it.
The first thing I think of hearing that is like, if it's someone who doesn't speak a language as well, I feel like there's like more potential for the AI to change their meaning and them to not even know that's what's happening because they're not familiar with the language.
There is, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's always the possibility of communicating something someone does
Yeah.
not want to communicate because they're not so familiar with the language. Like examples of blunders where you say something you think you're saying, and then everyone kind of looks at you weird because they're like, I don't think that means what you think it means. Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so yeah, but that's I think a fair concern, which probably. I don't know. I guess in all of these examples, maybe we could find some possibility of in which it can counteract, I guess, what it's trying to do. Um,
It is an interesting moment, though. I mean, now for only in the past couple of years, have I noticed that, like, when I travel internationally, the few times that I do, right? Like now on Android and Apple, I can just put in earphones and like live translate, which is empowering in some regard, but I also find it a little bit creepy because of that mediation. Like, how much trust
mhm,
do I have to put in my like AI driven translator on my phone to get it right? To sort of understand, Alex, as you're saying, sort of the nuance of the language and make sure the AI is not
Mhm.
misconstruing what somebody's saying. I'm putting a lot of trust in those technologies.
mhm,
Excuse me. And I don't know how I feel about that, honestly. Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess as long as you trust it more than your own capability, right? That's when it's useful. Which my foreign language skills are not great, so I
Yeah.
would I would think that would be helpful most of the time, even if there are blunders every now and then.
Yeah,
I feel
but if I'm translating, if I'm like visiting somewhere with a friend who speaks the
Mhm.
language natively, I feel a lot more comfortable being like, can you
Sure.
help me here, right? Because there's a trust relationship already built in, my friend and I. But there's this foreign thing on my phone that I'm just like, somebody says this is effective to translate like between these two languages.
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know. So I guess the big question here is, for me anyway, like to what extent are technologies like that autonomy empowering? And what ways are there threats to autonomy underlying them? Because I think it's a both and.
Mhm.
feel like as far as the translation thing goes, it seems like just kind of a more like advanced version of like Google Translate, which definitely is not completely accurate. But like for example, if I'm like at work and I need to talk to a customer who doesn't speak the same language, we can use Google Translate to convey good enough what we need to
Right.
communicate. So I think that like if you're having like an important discussion with someone, I would not trust Google Translate or by extension the like automatic AI translating, but I think it can be empowering for autonomy in like lower stakes situations where like I can see the words and see there's a few words that look kind of out of place, but I can still get the sense of the meaning. And I assume that those are words that have double meanings that the Google Translate just put it incorrectly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Don't sign a contract based on a Google Translate.
Yeah,
Right, right.
exactly.
Yeah. That first speaker in the podcast also differentiated in a way that I hadn't thought before, I don't think, between, first of all, between autonomy and moral autonomy, which we can tease apart. But she was arguing that uh, autonomy is a concept that's linked to like independence generally. And she argued that that was an instrumental value, right? That having autonomy is an instrument to my doing something else. Whereas moral autonomy, she was arguing, was an intrinsic value. So I think what she was saying was things like wheelchairs provide us are instruments to our autonomy, right? But what they're meant to support is our moral autonomy, which is freedom of action in accordance with our values. And I think what she's trying to do at the start of that podcast is like tease apart the possibility of AI enhancements to our autonomy and AI enhancements to our moral autonomy,
Hmm.
which I thought was an interesting distinction. Because I've got these like relatively strong and maybe growing intuitions that uh, technologies like AI and others can enhance our autonomy, but limit our moral autonomy,
Mm.
which is interesting. Um,
What can you say a bit more about that, Jonathan? I'm curious
I
to
don't know,
hear.
Alex. I mean, I can try. Yeah, I'm thinking this through with you all on the spot here. I think if we take autonomy, part of this is just like stipulating definitions, right? But if we take autonomy to be enhancements to my independence, right? If I've lost the use of my lower legs or never had them, and a wheelchair or assisted device can help me with mobility, and that is seems to be autonomy enhancing because I'm not reliant on other things, other persons, but through that technology, I become more independent. But that's just like an instrumental account of my independence. Like generally speaking, the use of things to increase my independence is there. But the thing that I think bioethics is meant to respect is not merely freedom, but it's freedom for particular things. That is to make decisions in line with my values. And I think, although maybe I'm reading into it too much, this first podcast speaker was arguing implicitly anyway that AI can't help us with the latter thing. Like it can't help us increase our it it can't have moral autonomy and it can't help us increase our moral autonomy. It's just an
Hmm.
instrument.
Yeah.
So it's more like a wheelchair than it is like a friend.
Yeah. So the reason why I was curious but was because I was wondering if you think um one comes necessarily with the other, or if they can be separated. Like, is one part like is the translation good in that it's instrumental, but then when you're using it as a search engine, it's not because you don't do the thinking, or is it just, the same thing can do both, enhance your instrumental but undermine your moral?
I feel like I'm stuck there. I don't have any ready to hand answers because it feels like to stick with the translation example. Yeah, it's an instrument, sure. It's like increasing my the usefulness of my independence. But to do that, to free up my independence seems to be to free almost necessarily to free it up for my value-driven decision making. So for my moral autonomy. So it feels like you
Hmm.
can't really
Hmm.
tease those apart that carefully. And the best that one could do is to make some argument, and I'm not even sure how strong it is, that AI can't have moral autonomy. Right?
Well, I mean, I can't think of a way that like AI could like give you more moral autonomy, except maybe in the sense that like you could like just like learn more about different values kind of through using it as a search engine maybe, but ways where it could limit moral autonomy are ways where I see people asking it for opinions. Like people on Twitter will like at Grok, what is your opinion on this? When I was looking at the when Snapchat rolled out an AI feature a couple of years ago, I was interested in that because I was like, well, this app was mostly used by like teenagers. So what are they going to be looking at with when they're using this AI? So I was just like asking it a bunch of different questions about all kinds of things just to see like if they ask about controversial topics, what are they going to get? So I was like asking about like if different countries should be free, in most countries it said like yes, this country and its people should be free, but then when I asked it about should Palestine be free, and it said, oh well, this is a very complicated topic and we don't know if it should be free or not. And I was like, so it's like it kind of has like a moral idea already built in that whoever programmed this AI has decided that they are going to like perpetuate their own values through this AI, and then maybe like some impressionable young person who is using this AI is then going to be influenced by whatever different values the creator of it had.
Hmm.
Yeah. Say, well, this is for me like a central worry, right? That that the training bias that these algorithms carry, everyone carries at least some bias, right? Um, Nudges us slightly in particular directions. And so this is a technology that's unlike a wheelchair in that it is, uh, I mean, I don't want to give it too much agency here, but like it's manipulative. So it nudges like the Israeli-Palestinian conversation in a particular direction because of the bias of its training data and maybe its post-training. Like there's probably
Yeah.
bias across that life cycle, right? Um, that is uncomfortable to me too. So now I'm trusting this translator on my phone, but recognizing that, I mean, much like you and I, we've got our biases, but what the algorithm's biases are not particularly transparent to me. So
Yeah.
if I'm
Mm.
asking it to translate, yeah, yeah, it seems like there could be worries that even creep in at the level of translation.
Mm.
And maybe a counter argument is, well, wheelchairs nudge too, right? Like they're nudging you to like think of think that somehow not having the use of your legs, for instance, to stick with my example, is a problem that needs to be resolved, as opposed to a difference in living, right? A better example probably is like cochlear implants in the deaf community. So here's a technology where like one can regain hearing, but some members of the deaf community actively choose not to pursue it because they see themselves as a member of a
Mm.
particular community, and that implant is going to draw them out of that.
I don't have
Very
cochlear
interesting.
implants, but I do have hearing aids.
Oh, there you go, Amy. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I personally, I am all for enhancing my medical
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
abilities. And when the podcast was talking about the wheelchair too, I was thinking about a family friend of mine. You know, he has MS, and I've seen him like from when I was a child to now, like gradually get worse and worse, and his wheelchair has gotten way more fancy over time. And I was trying to understand, like, okay, what's the new technology in AI wheelchairs? And I guess it can like use your vision tracking to direct where it thinks you want to go, and or like head or verbal commands. And I do think like in his case in particular, the last time I saw him was a couple of years ago, and I imagine he might be a little bit worse now. But he would like barely be able to like move a finger to move this tiny little joystick. And so I could imagine that ability being gone now or soon. And then, yeah, maybe there's just he has control over his eyes, and like that gives him a lot of autonomy. I've seen him in social situations where like he's just kind of stuck in a spot and like relying on other people to come up to him. But if you have the ability to navigate yourself and participate in life a little bit more, that's hugely beneficial. And I would think the positives would, you know, outweigh and give those people a lot more autonomy.
That makes really good sense to me, Amy. I love the idea that one of the ways that technologies like AI can increase our moral autonomy is just by giving us options, right? Giving us
Mhm.
choice. So I can choose to use a technology for a particular purpose, given a particular value that I have. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes really good sense to me. I think for me, that's still butting up against the problem of the nudge, right? The technologies are built with a specific purpose and with specific biases. So even if my values are A, the technology is going to give me like A adjacent, right? Like A prime.
Hmm.
And so I'm slowly getting nudged a little bit away from the thing that I hold valuable to the thing over here. Now, maybe that's not a big deal. Maybe that's just the nature of the world, and that's how we interact with each other and technologies all the time. Um, yeah,
Maybe it would be interesting now to hear a bit about the history of moral autonomy, because I guess that raises the question in me, whether, it's even whether that is a bias, we don't necessarily need to think of as, particularly important, especially when there's other valuable things that we see in our interactions with these kinds of technologies that would maybe liberate us more if didn't have these qualms about, oh, we have to be morally autonomous or.
Yeah. I could. I don't want to. I will. I'll take a couple of minutes and talk that through from my perspective, because I just had a conversation with a good friend and colleague at APPI this year, the Association of Practical and Professional Ethics Conference, and she pointed out or reminded me that the principle of respect for autonomy, which is again a key principle in bioethics, emerged out of the Belmont Report, and in the Belmont Report, it was called respect for persons. And so its earliest iteration had the sense of like more of like a human dignity angle on it, and not so much like freedom of decision making angle. The respect for autonomy, I think, emerged later, and it really was driven by kind of like a Kantian post Enlightenment sense of individualism, that like we should see ourselves as the ideal of ourselves is some sort of like rational isolated decision maker, some sort of isolated critter whose flourishing is in accordance with our maximizing reason, or some like story like that.
Mhm.
uh, but more and more bioethics is coming, I think, circling back around to respect for persons, especially with the stuff on relational autonomy, which I find just really fascinating. So if as I think Alex and I both do, come from sort of a feminist philosophy background, then relational autonomy suggests that
So there's actually
we're not isolated decision makers in that way, but somehow we're made up, or at least altered by our decisions and our relationships. And I think that's much more like a respect for a person's account, where we just have to accord the person as a whole being in its relation, and not try to strip all that away and be like, wait, are you making your free rational decision on your own? So yeah, maybe Alex, to your point, like maybe we should, maybe you're arguing for jettisoning this like isolationist view of moral autonomy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily arguing for anything, but yeah, it seems to me, and I was having again a similar conversation about this kind of thing that um, it's not that I don't necessarily see value in ideals like moral autonomy, but sometimes, I just wonder if you take some of these ideas to their natural conclusion, maybe the things that they lead to based on the assumptions that are kind of baked in, like, these Kantian individualist Enlightenment ideals you were mentioning, might potentially kind of fulfill, or, well, not that they turn us from relational beings to non-relational beings, of course, like we are in relations to the world, but they kind of have us create our own reality in a way that leads to our isolation in order to kind of think about ourselves as fulfilling our moral autonomy goals. And I mean, like in philosophy, it's just moral, like autonomy in general is such, coming from a philosophy education background, especially people thinking about whether and how we should develop autonomy in children is just such a contested topic that to me itself speaks to the fact that, okay, if it's so contested, there's something wrong with our ideas of what autonomy is, right? Because typically, if people can gravitate toward an idea and say, you know what, these seems right to us, I won't necessarily go so far as to say that it's probably some kind of moral truth, but it's more likely to be some kind of moral truth than if people are just seeing so many problems with it. Um, so yeah, I don't know.
I feel like as I've been working on this book, and especially this book chapter in engineering ethics, I've been leaning towards asserting respect for autonomy as a problem, right? To sort of be like, it stands on this old antiquated foundation of individualism that like just doesn't jive with how we work now. But that opens up all kinds of, I think, really interesting new questions about what it looks like to make decisions, let's say together. And I don't mean that socially necessarily, but I mean socially plus mediated by our technologies. So this for me is the AI ethics angle. So if we're emerging into a world where more and more of our decision-making practices will be informed by algorithms, then what it is to respect autonomy is to respect autonomy of a system. So a few decades ago, that was like a social system, that was collective responsibility, that was relational autonomy. On the feminist side, like that was social interactions. But now we've got this like, I don't know, like differently technologically mediated sense of decision making. So autonomy, especially for engineers, this analogy works out really well for me because engineers very seldom work alone. They work in collaborative environments with teams and clients and others, managers, and the whole network. And so the decision making becomes this dynamic, iterative sort of process.
Hmm.
I think really that's what's happening when we're engaging with algorithms too in the AI world, is that, you know, to circle full circle now to the translation, when an AI translates into my headphones what somebody is saying in real time, like the responsibility is on me to sort of imagine worlds in which that translation is inaccurate, but it's also the responsibility of the algorithm and the designers and the engineers and like everybody who puts this forward. And all of a sudden, respect for autonomy becomes the respect for like a semi-autonomous mixed agential system or something incredibly messy.
Yeah. I think potentially where it gets a little more problematic than just like, working with other humans to make a decision is like the weight that the human places on the AI's opinion. Because I think that, sometimes people are like, oh, well, the AI has all this knowledge, it's been fed all this information, so it's like better than any one human. And then not really, considering who trained it, how was it trained, and the biases behind that. And I have an example from my past that I'm like a little embarrassed that my dad told me his opinion on something, and I kind of brushed it off. And then I saw online somewhere that, someone had asked this AI their opinion on this topic. And I admittedly was like, oh, maybe my dad was right. But like when this AI was agreeing with him, and I like that was uncomfortable for me to realize that, you know, I was
Yeah.
maybe putting more weight in that situation too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. Like there's a, I mean, to me, it stands as an example of shared or collaborative decision making. We're putting, I mean, the question is the same question we ask each other when we're having conversations like this. Like, how much stock do you put into the things that I say versus what you think? And that is that perspective taking. And yeah, and the I'm not convinced that there's much difference between this you and me conversation and conversations with generative AI, which are analogously black boxed, right? You can't tell why I'm making my decisions necessarily without a lot of background knowledge about me. So you have to take what I say with some grains of salt, I guess the expression is. Yeah. And Amy, that doesn't strike me as an embarrassing story. That seems like I'm sure your dad is like, see, I was right.
I know, I just wish I had listened to him first.
I'm going to save that story for my 10-year-old in a few years. Be like, Amy told me this story. You should listen to your dad. Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to just bring up from the podcast was so there were three speakers, right? One was sort of theoretically framing. The second speaker was on health data and AI, so mHealth sort of technologies. And the third speaker came from the UK's National Health Service and was talking about predictive health analytics. And that I want to bracket because that makes me very nervous. So I'm going to shove health data way over here a little bit. But mHealth technologies, I think there's some really cool examples there. And one of the things that the speaker brought up was the Fitbit, like wrist watches. And he was talking about how those could provide, he said more information, but really they're providing more data, right? Whatever. They provide more information about your health. But they're already like gamified. And so he gives the example of the Fitbit gamifying exercise routines. So, like he says at one point in the podcast, and I'll paraphrase here, exercising is terrible. Like it's hard, it's like annoying, nobody wants to do it. So, if we gamify it, it can like nudge people to do it more. And that increases your health, but it decreases your autonomy, he argues.
Yeah.
And he's like, what do you do with that? Right? Which I think is a really fascinating question, because there are some moments where, again, full circle, we live in a bioethical environment that still seems to prioritize, especially with patients and research subjects, like their individual informed consent, right? Their autonomy. And if we can evidence their autonomy, they've opted in or opted out, then we can move ahead with the treatment or the research or whatever. But his example is like sometimes it's not good overall to respect somebody's autonomy. Because if my autonomy says exercise is hard, I don't want to do it, that leads to bad health outcomes for me and bad health outcomes for health systems more generally, right? Puts more burdens on health systems, especially health systems like the NHS. So maybe it's good to be manipulated in that way. Sorry, Sable, go ahead.
No, all I was gonna say is that I feel like that a lot of people who are like getting something like a Fitbit are doing, or anything else that like gamifies something you don't want to do, are like signing up for it because they know it's going to make something they don't want to do into something more fun. So I would think that the majority of people who are like, well, I don't want to exercise, but I'm getting this to help me do it. So I'm going to let it do what it does and then see if that helps me exercise because I don't want to exercise. Are people who like play like a learning game or a learning app to like learn a new language or a new skill. They're like, well, I don't want to do this, but this app is supposed to make it fun, so I'm going to let it do its thing and it'll make me have fun learning something I don't want to learn, even though like I want to, but I won't enjoy the process.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. On the other hand, what about, here's just a potential counter argument, right? What if I was like, I don't want to be an addict, but I'm going to go to Vegas and gamble, right? Because gambling is fun. But the way that Vegas is set up, and casinos in generally are set up, is to incentivize, nudge me to continue to gamble, right? So even if I thought gambling was fun, but I didn't want to be an addict, I might be incentivized by the system to be addicted to gambling. Is there any, I feel like that's a stretch, Sable. Is there any analogy there to exercise?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is like some similarity in that both times the system is set up that way. But like if you like get a Fitbit that's going to gamify exercising, you're like, my goal is I want to be in better shape, so I'm going to invest in it because I know it's going to make exercising more fun. If you are going to gamble, then if your goal, even if your goal is to have fun and not become an addict, I think that the most people who like say, oh, it's just one drink, it's just one gamble, whatever, I'm not going to get addicted, they still are like aware that the addiction is a thing, even if it's not going to happen to them. And they are going into it for like the goal of having fun and they don't think it's going to have any lasting effects. So I mean, even though if like there is algorithmically a similarity, I think the difference is that a gambling like system that incentivizes you to keep playing is taking advantage of someone who they already know is not going to intend to become an addict. But the Fitbit system is taking advantage, but not in a negative sense, of someone who is signing up for something to better them. So I think the intention of someone who does either of those things is going to be different because one person is intentionally like submitting to the gamification and one person thinks they're not going to fall for it.
So then you feel like there's a little bit of ethics that slips in at that level too, right? Because the intention, what you're describing as the intentions of the algorithm or the system, are the intentions of the designers and the coders and the data sets and everything else, the biases that slip in. So these systems, gambling systems and health Fitbit systems, have different moral goals. Like one is to incentivize this bad behavior, and one is to incentivize this good behavior.
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, even if like the CEO of these companies maybe really doesn't care about the outcome and just care about the money, I think that like the moral value of the systems themselves is definitely different. And like the decisions that like go into making these algorithms and stuff, like even if they might have like fundamentally some of the same like mechanisms, there is a difference between no one is real. People don't really get. I mean, yeah, there are some people who are obsessed with exercise, definitely, but it's not usually the same as someone who's like gambling and losing all their money because the algorithm and just like the way gambling works is so addictive. So, there is definitely like a moral difference in the intent and what the function does. Like an algorithm itself, I think that conceptually an algorithm is like a neutral thing. It really depends what it's being used for. And a lot of those uses can be bad, but some, like an exercise game algorithm, are morally neutral unless somehow it's being used for evil.
Yeah, I think it somewhat depends on like the user or the owner's intention of the product too. And I view it as like potentially, depending on the person, not an autonomy issue, but just like a self-regulation thing. Because um I have a whiteboard at home where I like keep track of the number of times I work out every year, and I update that every time I work out. And it's like maybe because I'm not intrinsically motivated enough, I like get this little extra motivation and regulation for myself. But I like this is a decision I'm making for myself to that I want to work out more. And so I'm using this as a tool towards that goal.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
so
Amy,
yeah.
that's super helpful, right? Because now here's an example of the tension between moral autonomy and autonomy. You've set this
Mhm.
goal based on some value that you hold about how you think you ought to exercise or not, and
Mhm.
you're using the whiteboard as a tool for your autonomy, right? To support your decision making, your follow through, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like having a higher order desire, and you just want to suppress those lower order desires that are not as important, but that impede your ability to accomplish the higher order desire, right? Like, don't eat that extra pastry. That's a very particular example because I've been eating a lot of pastries lately. But you know, you look at it, it's really nice. You want to eat it, then you're like, you know what? That conflicts with my desire to be healthy. Next time I shouldn't eat it, but then it's in front of you again. So it's like a way of um, managing. I guess it also points to the fact that autonomy is kind of like almost a system, right? I like the self-regulation idea, right? How do you regulate your behavior in order to
Yeah.
accomplish that given the circumstances you're in? Because even like the Fitbit is not in a neutral world health-wise, right? When you have fast food in every corner and you have I mean, we no longer have cigarette ads, so that's good. But, you have all these other factors that make it so hard to be healthy. Um, Maybe it doesn't really undermine your autonomy, the Fitbit, but it kind of adds an additional force that undermines some of the other forces that complicate how your autonomy is realized. So yeah, I like that too.
Yeah, nice, Alex. I agree.
But is there worry, Alex and Amy, for either of you that self-regulation slips back in that idea of like that what we call the Kantian like post-enlightenment idea of rational individual decision making? Is there some place for that still?
Yeah, I think it maybe depends on like if the Fitbit is the one setting the goals for you, if it's the one saying like, oh, you need to achieve 10,000 steps or whatever. But yeah, I think it potentially comes into play like who's deciding the goals and who's deciding what we're tracking. And if that's you, then I don't think that it really undermines your autonomy. But if it's the Fitbit telling you what to do and telling you what goals to track, that's potentially more problematic.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I think that that sort of view opens the door for what I'll call here the pastry eater example, thanks to Alex, right? So what if my uh, self-motivation, my individual value goal is like pastries are delicious. It's a hedonistic perspective, right? Pastries are delicious. I only live for so long. Why shouldn't I eat the second and third pastry? In fact, like exercising gets in the way of my eating pastries. In fact, I shouldn't exercise because I should eat pastries. There's a sense there, and there are probably a lot of people like this actually. Um, there's a sense there that that's a perfectly rational self motivation, right? Like I've identified a value I share, I've given myself a reason for it, and I'm acting on those reasons. There's a world in which like respecting autonomy is to say your goal is your goal. Like as long as you have made that decision and you can give me a reason for it, more power to you, right? You could play this game with smoking and drug use and like pick a thing, right? But we don't want to do that because there's a world in which there's a higher, to stick with Alex's language, a higher order value, more objective value that like, well, I don't know if that's more objective, but there's a competing value that like not eating pastries is going to promote your health, which promotes your longevity, which means you can do other things in the world, and that's better than eating pastries.
Yeah, I think it also kind of relates just because you brought Kant again, Jonathan. I'm thinking whether it's a matter of, again, not thinking of ourselves as individuals who could make any decision and it would be equally good, rather than people who are part of a relational network and who owe other things to others, but are also influenced by others as well. And, um, like it's one thing if you make this decision and you don't have a spouse or kids to just eat pastries until you die from some pastry-related disease. Um, it's another if you have those relations and those are important to you as well, and you owe people things that, again, are perhaps dependent on your relation to them. And then again, like kind of thinking also of the fact that perhaps this desire even is not, or this value is not something that is objectively rational in a way that can ever be separated from all the influences, I guess, that we have in our lives that make us want to do what we want to do, or that make some options possible for us but not others, um, which might again undermine some other goals. And perhaps these goals might be important because they're tied in our role as members of a society, which collectively might need healthy people to flourish. Or I don't, and that's, it can become controversial if some higher ups are saying we all need to be healthy to flourish together, and that means all of you down there have to, work out constantly and never eat pastries. But yeah, I don't know. It's really complicated.
Yeah, this is why I find this fascinating because I think from my perspective, what especially like large language model generative AIs have done is introduce this other layer of complexity to this already complex process about to what extent I'm free to make my own decisions, what extent I should accommodate what I owe others into my decision making. And there's tension there between the relational and the individualistic, but now the like supportive technology of AI. I don't even know how to describe it really, but yeah, I think that's really interesting space. And part of my pointing this out is that a lot of fear, not a lot, some of the biggest theorists in AI ethics right now are leaning pretty heavily on the bioethical principles. So trying to unpack what respect for autonomy means. So Luciano Floridi, in his 2023 AI ethics book, has argued for respect for autonomy, but sort of a humans first, humans in the loop model of respect for autonomy. And while that makes practical sense, just given the world in which we live, like I keep asking the bigger, like, what grounds that approach and why should we think that way? Just given where we live and conceptually, like in that tension between relational autonomy and individualistic models. Yeah, the third speaker, the National Health Systems speaker, talking about predictive health analytics, I said I was going to bracket, but they said one of the quotes that stood out to me was that AI will know everything about you, right? There's a world in which the health systems, the national health system in the UK thinks AI can eat all data, right? Genetic data, health data, social data, Fitbit data, and through its algorithmic propensities or whatever, tell a story about your predicted health outcomes and your predicted best path towards whatever, and how you can minimize costs to the national health system and everything. It could tell a story about your health in this really robust way. I kind of want to bracket that because that just adds another layer of complexity for today. But I think that's super interesting that there are policy makers really on the health data side who think that's going to be a good thing overall, right? Like,
Yeah, I think that kind of makes me think also, Jonathan, of the incentives behind all these policies and approaches to um, maintaining, I guess, a healthy population, right? Which are all kind of driven by economic incentives or incentives perhaps that are extrinsic to what being human and flourishing as a human might mean for most of us. And I think that might be a problem in itself because, when you have these incentives that are commercialized, right? Collect as much data so you can sell products to people or save the healthcare system money or whatever it is. This kind of skews, I guess, the way that not that there's any purity, I guess, in the way that we think about collectively in terms of what's good, but even often the fact that you feel like you need to argue in economic terms to policymakers to be, yeah, that makes sense to cut, or limit fast food because it will save, the healthcare system so much money. It kind of not pollutes, but you know what I mean, kind of shapes the way in which we start thinking about these things that might start making them seem like autonomy undermining rather than promoting, even, whether this is a relational autonomy or whatever it is. But um, yeah.
yeah. This has been fun for me. I feel like we've just made a mess of the concept of autonomy, which I think is accurate. I mean, I think it is a messy sort of thing to tease apart. But uh, other thoughts before we wrap up? I love the idea, the fundamental idea, I think, of respect for autonomy is that I am seen as capable and am capable of making my own value-informed decisions. And I think as long as we hold on to that like really simple fundamental concept, apart from all the complexity we've talked about, I think as long as we read AI technologies as supporting or disrupting that, then we've got a way to evaluate them, right? So there are worlds in which we can read questions of algorithmic bias through that lens, for instance. Um, Yeah, I don't know what to do with that exactly next, but I'm glad for the chance to talk it through, and thank you so much for coming this afternoon. Um, I if you've got these on your calendar already, I hope you'll note that I had to shift the next one, which was supposed to be next week or right after spring break, because I'm going to be gone on a 12-hour time difference. So I won't be able to do it. So I shifted the
Well,
date.
why are you going to be on a 12-hour time difference?
I get to go. I'm so grateful to my colleagues on this grant project in virtual reality. I get to go to IEEE VR in South Korea.
Oh,
So
wow.
I'll be in Daegu next week through the following week.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really
What are you
grateful.
going to be doing there?
The grant team is, so I'm the ethics lead on this big Vera build, virtual experience reality accelerator project. And they're demoing the project at IEEE as an invited session. So we've got the build ready to go, and we're going to demo the platform and let people test it out in the landscape of lots of other VR presentations. And my job at the conference is really to sort of get a sense of the landscape at IEEE of folks thinking about ethics in the VR context. So I'll just be going to a lot of sessions.
So, like, what kind of ethics? Like, if you punch someone in VR, is it as morally wrong as punching them in real life?
I hope, Sable, that's a session, but I think it's actually more mundane on the data side. Like, how do we preserve, participant privacy, for instance? Um,
Oh.
yeah.
I
So
thought I thought that would actually be really interesting. 'Cause you know about you remember the metaverse?
I do remember the metaverse. Yeah,
Now
sure.
there were like complaints about like harassment and stuff in the metaverse on like the first days it was open. I just thought that was kind of like theoretically interesting. Like, can you like get someone in trouble for like metaverse harassment? Like, how does it
Yeah.
compare to real life harassment? Like, there were people like groping other people's avatars. Like where,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like,
That
how do
doesn't
you
surprise me at all if you've
morally
met people
judge
online.
this? Like compared to these same actions in real life, like how much does the
Amy, thank you.
um the dimension of it being virtual like change it? Can we do a session on that in the future? That would be
That
so
would
much
be
fun. I
great.
want
Yeah.
to talk about VR ethics now.
Yeah, VR trolley problems. If I pull the lever and change the train in VR, is it as bad? Yeah. No, this is
Yeah.
great. So yeah, I'm excited, but it just is a little disrupting to everything else. So I have
Oh
to
yeah.
do a dissertation defense actually, which is scheduled for 11 a.m. to 12:30, and so I'll be doing that at 11 p.m. It's just complicated, but
Oh,
it's
that
a
sounds fun though.
it's a pleasure. Yeah, I'm really grateful to be able to go. So
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wonder if they
So,
had. Sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, so the next meeting is on April, right?
right, yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
think I set it for the 9th or the second
the
or
ninth.
whatever that Thursday is. Yeah. Yeah. And those, Alex, I think the last three will be sort of back to back, the last 3 weeks of the term. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, do
Mm.
you know about like the AI summit that they had in India a couple weeks ago?
No.
They had like a huge AI summit in Delhi. I was just wondering if there's like people like that who like go there to like observe like ethical questions with AI and stuff. It was the whole summit was kind of a disaster. Like I know someone who used to live in Delhi and then he moved to Mumbai, but now he's studying in Germany. But anyhow, like he was telling me about some of the crazy things that happened there. Like people got there at noon to the center for the AI demonstrations and stuff. And then the Prime Minister of India showed up. So they kicked everyone out until 6 o'clock. And then when they let people go back in, like some people's like display tech had been stolen. And what they do in India, whenever there's someone like really important coming, is they close down all the roads to everyone except the really important people. So all the people who weren't super important had to like walk for hours because there was no transportation for them or anything else. And he said
Oh,
like
there's a
that would
mess.
always happen like when he was living there. It's like if someone important is coming to town, then no one else gets to do anything. And then there were some people who like stole technology from China and pretended that their university had invented it. So it just sounded like a disaster overall. Hopefully, the one you're going to is better organized.
I
I
think
think it will be.
fingers crossed. Yeah, I'll tell you in a
I
couple of
think it
weeks.
will be.
All right, Alex, it's so good to see you, and Sable too. Thank you both for
Good
being
to see
here.
you too. Yeah.
All right, have fun in
Enjoy,
South Korea.
yeah, enjoy
Thanks.
South Korea.
Thank you. Thank you.
Enjoy the food
I will do my
most
best.
of
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
Yeah. No pastries though.
No pastries, though well, Japanese pastries are really good. I can't
Well,
think of
maybe
South
then.
Korean pastries now, but I'm sure they have some good ones.
All right, you guys. Let's see you later.
Take care.
All right,
Bye.
see you in April.
Bye.
Bye.